This week we're going to be talking about this Wall Street Journal article titled "Mamdani May Herald a New Kind of Class Struggle." So the author of this article discusses the current state of socialism like rhetoric in the United States, framed around Zohan Mamdani, the Democratic Party candidate for the New York City mayoral race. So I just want to read a little bit from this article and get your take on this, Justin. So bear with me while I read some of this. It says, the temptation of socialism for callow youth has been strengthened in recent years by a couple of factors. First, the drifting into distant memory of the Cold War. Growing up in Britain in the 1970s and 80s, I can attest that the appeal of socialism was always tempered by the reality that the place that most proudly called itself socialist was a prison colony for very poorly remunerated serfs. The Soviet Union and its satellites were poor advertisements for an ideology their name proclaimed. Today, socialism doesn't immediately conjure gulags, though it should. Capitalism doesn't immediately conjure economic and social nirvana either. When I was in my 20s, the faces of socialism were those of semi-embalmed members of the Politburo and crusty old trade union leaders with bad breath. In America today, the leading advocates of socialism are Mr. Mamdani and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, our 30-somethings from New York whom you might not mind matching up with on a dating site. The second factor has been the mainstreaming of far-left ideology in education. He goes on to talk about college campuses and how the idea of berserkly, which I thought was pretty clever, in the 70s was a joke, but now it's almost become standard in campuses across the country. And you've got 22-year-olds emerging from these institutions with a warped view of the world, their minds filled with silly yet corrosive ideas about decolonization, constructivism, intersectionality, and white man's guilt. But the big difference now is, in the past, we could rely on the relentless economic logic of capitalism to fix these things, especially for these overeducated that are in pursuit of a job, career, steady accumulation of income, wealth, and a stake in the country would dim that allure of socialism. How many kids who had Che Guevara shirts and busts of Karl Marx are now thriving in law and financial firms? But what if that is no longer the future that awaits these capitalists in chrysalis? The author goes on to talk about the AI revolution and how jobs are being threatened. The very jobs that these people coming out of college, getting into the real world, would be inhabiting. He references a study published by Microsoft last month that found that among the 40 jobs most at risk from AI are personal finance analysts, management analysts, and public relations specialists. So the author concludes this by saying, all that expensive education and no prospects at the end of it. It's enough to make Marxism-Leninism start to make sense. Polling indicates a lot of these people are voting for Mr. Mamdani in November. It seems likely to cement the great political inversion of the past 50 years, in which the educated elites are moving left and people without a college degree have embraced the Republican Party. So, Justin, I think there's an element of this that we've, basically grown up in, this like idea of champagne socialists, that sort of thing. But maybe this AI revolution might hasten, and by this author's words, cement this idea of socialism being propelled by overeducated elites and not the armies of laborers that Marx envisioned. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think that I understand the logic. The logic is that you're going to have all these highly educated people who won't have jobs. They're going to be some of the first people who are thrown out of this, won't be able to get jobs. And they don't have skilled labor, a skilled labor background. They're not going to be able to go become a plumber if they've previously been a lawyer. A lot of them are just never going to do that. And so some of those people, are maybe they're liberals or they might be conservatives or liberals or progressives even, but they're not necessarily socialists. Historically, socialists, it's the working class people where you get that, lower income people. Well, and so if they don't have it, then they're going to turn to socialism. What I think is interesting about that, though, is while I could see that playing out that way, I actually think that higher educated people will probably, especially the ones who already have jobs, will probably figure out ways to leverage AI to continue working in some capacity. Not all of them. Some of them will just be eliminated. The jobs will just be eliminated or whatever. But I think they're more likely, the more educated you are, and I mean, just the more educated you are, I think the more likely it is you'll be able to figure out a way to use AI to your benefit. What I worry about is the lower income and working class people who will feel like, and young people who aren't in the workforce at all. And we're seeing those people are already having a lot of trouble getting jobs, even the college graduates, a lot of trouble getting jobs because companies aren't hiring new people. They're trying to find ways to keep existing people by having them work with AI, but they don't want to bring more people, new people in. This is one of the things we're starting to see. So I think that younger people, even the educated ones, and working class people who are in jobs that AI can replace. So yeah, like plumbers and electricians and stuff, AI is not going to be able to replace that very easily at all. But there are a lot of jobs where you're working in retail, or you're working at a restaurant, or you're working, sort of a real entry level type job as a receptionist or something. And those kinds of jobs can be replaced by AI. And the problem those people have is they, I think, are going to struggle to figure out a way to move up in the income ladder in a world where AI is consuming more and more of the jobs. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, the barrier to going from working class into middle class and upper middle class and being wealthy, I think is going to get larger. It's going to feel more impossible to go from recent college grad or recent high school grad to wealthy person with a house. That's going to feel harder and harder and harder to do, because the old playbook was you go to college and you get a good job and you make lots of money because you went to college, and then you get to have all these things.
Right.
But now those opportunities are closing because AI is taking all of that work now at the entry level positions of a lot of these different industries. So the barrier is going to feel to a lot of these people like, how am I ever supposed to break in? Whereas I think there's a lot of people who are in it right now. They're not just going to start mass laying off all the lawyers. The lawyers will who are already there, will figure out ways to justify their jobs and use AI to their benefits and shift the kinds of things they do. There's an unwillingness for companies of all sizes to just mass eliminate jobs that they already have. But it's very easy for them to say, we're just not going to hire any more people. That's much, much easier for them to do. And so I think that is a problem for, it's a problem for working class people. And I guess what I'm saying is, like, these categories almost don't apply anymore. I think the real categories are not like the educated people and the people with lots of college degrees and all of that versus the manual labor people. I think it's more like, do you fall into the category where you're already in a position that's really good? You've already cemented yourself as, I've got a job. It's a well-paying job. I'm in a position where I can be valuable, and I'll just figure out a way to sort of rework my situation. Or are you trying to break in from nothing? And I think it's the people who are trying to break in from really low-level jobs and newly college grads and newly high school grads, those people I think are going to have a lot of trouble breaking into the system, because so the quote unquote entry level, I mean, think about it, right? The entry level job and the interning and all of that stuff was the way that people in our generation broke into companies and industries when they had no experience, right? You go work some low level job and you work your way up. We both did that literally in our history. We both started as interns in think tank world. We started as interns. We then got entry level basic jobs, which both of them, by the way, don't need to exist today.
Right.
Like you were basically doing very low level, like media
tracking,
type tracking and stuff like that.
Posting and tracking.
That job. And I was doing very low level, like editing. I was like the 5th editor down, right? Both of those jobs could be replaced now by AI easily. And in fact, the company we work for is the same company we started with then. They don't have those jobs anymore. Basically, those jobs don't exist, right? We don't have someone who was in the job that you had back then. And we don't have a really low level editor like I had. We just have eliminated those jobs. And so how would you break into that space now as, like, say, a graphic designer, which is now one of your main jobs at Heartland? How would you break into that space today when Heartland they're not going to hire another graphic designer probably, because it's now one guy who's a talented graphic designer like yourself, because of AI, can do way more graphic design work in a much shorter time. We will never need another graphic designer at the Heartland Institute. Never. And so think about how hard it would be to break into that if you were trying to get into it, right?
Right. But like, so, we've talked about this nation of renters concept before, and the idea, the allure of socialism to these people that feel like the deck is stacked against them. And AI, like you're describing, I think it's just like a whole nother level on top of that. I mean, we've talked about this before, even the absence of AI, where just the investment of how much money that you're spending on college versus what you're getting out of it. Back when I was in grade school, it was like, go to college and you'll make $1 million more or something like that, right? And then over time, it's like that amount of money that you're expecting to make out of college is going down, and the amount of money that it costs to go to college is going up, to the point where it's like, is it even like a great investment anymore? And now you slap on AI and reduce the amount of prospects and jobs out the gate, all the stuff that you're describing. And it's like, has it gotten like past this now? Or I don't know, this way, right? Where it's like all of these people coming out, like, I just, I've got $100,000 in debt, and I've got no way to possibly pay that back. Oh, what is Mom Donnie saying over there? Yeah, I think he's right. Like, I could see that. And then on the other side of the spectrum,
totally agree.
The vocational jobs, like we were talking about. There's this episode of South Park that's probably like a year or so old. And it wasn't about AI, if I recall correctly. It was about the idea that, like, your modern person doesn't know how to, like, change a tire, doesn't know how to, like, fix some random thing in their house. So they're constantly having to call these, like, repairmen or plumbers or engineers or whatever. And over the course of the episode, the vocational job people were just, like, incredibly wealthy. They're just walking around with just, like, gold chains on and, driving like fancy cars and all of that, because there's just like this inversion now, where you've had generations of people told, hey, the only way that you're making a good living is if you go to college and spend $50,000 to $100,000 getting an education or all of that. And it's just like put them on a path, on a bridge to nowhere, basically. And I just wonder if now we're seeing that bridge to nowhere is actually a bridge to being radicalized by the allure of socialism.
Yeah, well, I guess my point is, like, I think the answer to that is yes. But I also think there's a bunch of other working class people who are going to be in the same boat. And so it's kind of like this, the way the article is set up, the categories are like, well, maybe the working class people are actually going to become more conservative And AI is going to allow for that to happen in a way, because AI is going to be particularly hard on these higher income, more white collar type workers. And so maybe we're going to see this reversal in how people, how these what I'm saying is that's a category problem. The guy who's a plumber, the man or woman who's a plumber, electrician, that kind of thing, right? That person is in a really good spot. But the person who's working at Kohl's at the checkout line is in a really bad spot. And so they're both what you would consider to be like working class people historically. That's how a lot they would be categorized, right? They're working class people, but they're not white collar workers. You wouldn't say that. But what I'm saying is, even within that category, they're in totally different situations. It all depends on what kind of skilled labor job you have versus some other kind of working class job. And it all depends on what kind of position you're in when you're in this like white collar job situation. You're a lawyer or whatever. It all depends. And my point is, like, I think the bigger category difference is not going to be the white collar workers versus the blue collar workers. It's going to be the are you in an industry or trying to get into industries where the barriers are now getting larger and larger and larger. And if you're already in, then you're probably going to be fine. But if you're not in, it's going to be almost impossible for you to get in, and you're going to have to figure something else out.
All right, so let's wrap up the show. But you mentioned you were talking about plumbers, and you're like, or women. So a nice little catch there to not offend all of the women that are watching this. But I had to look it up. So Justin, take a guess.
I'm going to say 7%.
Okay, so Justin's guess is 7% of plumbers in the United States are women. I'm just dragging this out so that everyone else that's listening to this can think about it and come up with their own guess before I reveal to you the answer. According to the Department of Labor, this is an article from 2022. According to the Department of Labor, only 1.4% of plumber workers are women.
But it's not zero.
It's not zero. So
there are women out there. There are out there. Right. There's roughly 2%.
Yes, roughly.
So I'm
2%.
Trying to be inclusive.
That's perfect.
I think that's I mean, but that's and honestly, actually, now that you point that out, what is interesting is like the gender dynamics of all of that too. Like, let's be honest, the jobs that are the blue collar jobs that are paying really well right now are jobs that are overwhelmingly occupied by men. It's the electricians and the plumbers and the welders and that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And what kind of skilled labor job is predominantly for women? There's not a ton. They do exist. Like, you could argue maybe nursing kind of falls into something that's sort of like that category. Education for kids, but like there's not a lot of that kind of stuff that's historically for women. It's actually benefits men more. And women are the ones who have kind of taken over more of these jobs that are like the HR and that kind of thing, which I think are going to be replaced.
Yeah, more of a reason to, re-embrace the nuclear family. So it's all coming full circle, folks. All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Justin and Donald Save America. Tune in every week for a new episode. We're going to be bringing you stories like this. Like I said, identifying those kind of big threats to our future that might not be getting the attention that they deserve. We try to identify those and bring those front and center. These topics that we talked about today are just an example of that. So if you enjoyed the show, like I said, please subscribe. Leave a review if you're listening to the audio version of this. Share this content, like it, even leaving a comment under the video all helps break through those big tech algorithms and gets more eyes on this sort of content. So, Justin, where can the fine people find more of your work?
At Justin T. Haskins on X. You can also check out the Justin Haskins YouTube channel and go to justinhaskins.com.
Fantastic. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week. So long.